Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is my game of the year so far, and it's going to be difficult to beat. This is far from a hot take. The game is receiving critical acclaim from just about everybody. This is for good reason. The gameplay is satisfying, the music is nothing short of incredible, and the game's world is one of the most vibrant I've seen in decades. While I want to talk about all these aspects of the game, what has stuck with me the most in the weeks after beating it is the philosophical issue that the end of the game asks us to confront. And here I will put a massive spoiler warning for the game. Seriously, if you have not played it yet, this is going to spoil the entirety of the game. With the spoiler warning out of the way, it's time to talk about the game's premise. There's an entity called the Paintress that counts down from 100 in yearly increments. Whatever number she counts to is the age at which people will die. As the title might imply, she is counted down to 33 at this point in the game. The initial protagonist of the game is Gustav, a man who will die next time the Paintress counts down. All the people who are due to pass in the next year are given the option to set off on an expedition to defeat the Paintress, and so naturally, the game follows Gustav's expedition, Expedition 33. I called Gustav the initial protagonist because he's killed off at the end of Act 1 by who appears to be the main antagonist, Renoir. Renoir annihilates most of Expedition 33 right off the bat, and eventually kills Gustav, leaving Gustav's companion Maëlle to pick up the mantle of protagonist. She's joined by Verso, a mysterious figure voiced by my favorite voice actor, Ben Starr, who wants to stop the Paintress for his own reasons. This dynamic carries on until the end of Act 2, when several revelations occur simultaneously. First, the Paintress was not the villain. In defeating her, the party has instead enabled the deaths of everybody in the world. The Paintress was painting numbers to show that she was unable to save anybody older than a given number from Renoir, the person behind the gommage. Second, and more importantly, the world of Expedition 33 is not real. It is a painting created by the real-world version of Verso before he passed away in a house fire that also left his sister Alicia deformed. Their family, the Descendre family, has the ability to paint living worlds and inhabit them, although doing so for an extended period of time risks bodily harm or even death in the real world. The Paintress is in fact Verso's mother Aline, who was unable to live without him and has been in the painting for far too long. Renoir is Aline's husband and is trying to pull her out of the painting so she doesn't die. And I should specify that this is the real Renoir, the one that killed Gustave was just a creation of Aline. In order to do this, Renoir plans to destroy the painting and everything inside it. The final reveal at the end of Act 2 is that Maëlle is in fact Alicia, gone into the painting to find a way to get her mother out without destroying it, as she also does not want to lose this last piece of Verso's soul. The final battle of the game sees Maëlle face off against Verso. This is already a somewhat tragic conclusion, very reminiscent of the Gehrman fight in Bloodborne, which is my personal favorite boss fight of all time. But this fight is made far worse by the context of their conflict. As I mentioned, staying in the painting for too long risks death, and Alicia in the real world certainly seems close to it by the time the game's finale comes around. Thus, Verso wants to save his sister from the painting so that she can return to the real world. Alicia, meanwhile, prefers her life inside the painting, and doesn't much care if she dies in the real world so long as she gets to live a deformity-free, happy life in the painting. Both sides have very valid points, and I can honestly say I had a hard time choosing an ending. Ultimately, I chose to return Alicia to the real world, as I strongly believe in confronting grief head-on rather than through escapism. However, we need to take a step back a moment. Expedition 33 is a video game. Duh, I know, but it's important to think about this in the context of the story. The game asks you to choose between the Descendre family and the inhabitants of the painting, forces you to decide which has more value to you, which is more real. However, technically speaking, neither is real. The Descendres are just as fictional as Lune, Ciel, and the rest of the painting. What interests me about this conundrum is the criteria we use to determine which side of the equation matters more. Is it that the Descendres are in a fictional version of the real world, and therefore closer to ourselves? Is it that we're explicitly told the game's world is a painting, and must therefore have less value than those that painted it? How exactly do we determine which NPCs in games are real to us? Let's start with the most obvious factor, realism. Our perception of what's real in a game often hinges on how closely a character resembles the people and environments we encounter in the real world. Visual fidelity is the most immediate factor. Characters rendered in high detail with expressive facial animations, nuanced body language, and subtle environmental interactions tend to feel more believable. When an NPC reacts to their environment in a grounded manner, it triggers the same parts of our brain that process real human emotion. These cues ground them in our world even if they're occupying a fantastical space. Sound design, voice acting, physics, and world reactivity all contribute to this phenomenon. The crack in a character's voice, the hesitation in their speech, or the awkward silence after a traumatic event. All of these things invoke empathy by mimicking our own lived experience. Expedition 33 excels in this area, not just because of the character's emotional dialogue, but because of the way they move, the way the score swells at key moments, and the way the camera lingers just a beat too long on sorrowful expressions. You believe in them because the game works hard to make them feel physically present, emotionally coherent, and psychologically consistent. That said, realism doesn't have to mean photorealism. A stylized or abstract game can still achieve emotional realism. Take Undertale, for example. It is a game that is very simplistic in terms of art style, and yet it evokes powerful feelings through movement, pacing, music, and context. It's the emotional truth that matters here, whether a character's reaction feels real. So while graphical fidelity can certainly help, it's not the sole ingredient in realism. It's a composite effect, a collaboration between how characters look, sound, move, and respond to the world. In Skyrim, for example, the graphics are, or at least were at the time of release, good enough to achieve a sense of realism. However, the guards' robotic responses and the way townsfolk return to daily routines seconds after a dragon attack remind us that these characters are part of a scripted loop, not autonomous beings. That incongruity pulls us out of the illusion. The world might look real, but the people in it behave like wind-up toys. In Expedition 33, the combination of the world's realism and the emotional realism of its characters is what makes the philosophical twist hit so hard. The player is trained to view these people as real through the richness of their presentation, and when it is eventually revealed that they're not, the player is stranded, for lack of a better word. The emotional contradiction that follows is really the game's central thesis, the thing that sticks with us long after the credits roll. Contrast this with a game like Terraria, where NPCs serve purely mechanical roles that exist solely to aid the player. Their entire purpose is utilitarian. Visually, they're basic sprites. They don't react to your successes or failures. If they die, a replacement arrives shortly after. There's no funeral, no memory of them having existed at all. In fact, for one boss fight, the Wall of Flesh, you need to sacrifice NPCs to summon it, and that is the most useful they are in the entire game. This lack of systemic or emotional depth makes it easy to disregard their deaths as inconsequential. After all, we don't mourn the death of a tool, we simply get another. Realism can't account for everything, though. We can be deeply moved by characters that aren't hyper-realistic in a visual or technical sense, as mentioned earlier with Undertale, which points us towards something else: relationality. We care more about NPCs when we see them form relationships, when they care about each other, when they change because of one another, when they exist not only in relation to the player, but to the world and people around them. In cases like these, emotional realism often trumps technical realism. In Expedition 33, what makes the main cast feel real isn't just how they look or sound, but how they respond to each other. They grieve together, joke with each other, disagree, grow closer, and drift apart. You see bonds forming and unraveling as the story progresses. Compare this to a more transactional RPG companion, say a generic follower like the companions in most Bethesda games. Many of them are well written and well voiced, yes, but their emotional worlds largely revolve around the player. Their affection rises or falls based on your choices, and they follow you endlessly, which reinforces the idea that they exist solely for your benefit. They rarely form deep relationships with each other, which makes them feel like satellites rather than people. Compare this to the relationship system in Expedition 33, which, while revolving around Verso, does not feel nearly as forced, and enforces instead that each character is their own person. NPCs whose only relationship is that of companion to the player limit the emotional depth we can assign to them because they don't have a meaningful existence outside of us. Ultimately, relationality is about context. Those NPCs we choose to care about are part of a living, breathing social world. A character doesn't become real just because they talk to you. They become real when their existence carries weight outside of your interaction with them. When their choices, attachments, and values shape the story in ways you can't fully control. That unpredictability, that sense of autonomy, is what elevates them from a narrative device to a person you genuinely care about. Another key aspect of a real NPC is the role they play in the story. Not all NPCs are created equal, and our emotional investment in them is often shaped by how central they are to the narrative's progression. Take Aerith from Final Fantasy VII, for example. From the moment she meets Cloud in the church, Aerith becomes part of the emotional architecture of the game. She shares in the journey, builds relationships with other characters, and embodies a sense of hope and mystery that helps define the tone of the early game. Her personality is distinct, her goals are compelling, and her presence feels essential. Now compare that to the random Shinra soldiers you fight throughout the early game. These enemies are functionally disposable. They exist to slow your progress, to add mechanical tension to the level, but they're not characters in any meaningful sense. They're not written to be cared about, they're written to be defeated. This asymmetry is crucial. Aerith is not just more valuable because she's useful in battle, she's more valuable because the narrative asks us to value her, and gives us the time and space to do so. Her death later in the game hits like a freight train precisely because the game taught us to care. It built a relationship over time and then shattered it. When we consider which NPCs feel real to us, we're often responding to the degree to which their presence elicits our emotional or ethical engagement. Aerith demands it, the Shinra soldiers do not. Thus we grieve for one and forget the other. This dynamic illustrates something fundamental. We tend to value NPCs in proportion to the narrative consequences they carry. Characters who move the plot forward, who challenge the player's beliefs, are far more likely to feel real to us. They have arcs, they leave emotional residue. They're remembered not just as game elements, but as people we spent time with. Of course, this isn't just a matter of screen time, it's about depth and contextual significance. An NPC who appears for only a few minutes can still leave a lasting impression if they're tied meaningfully to the story or to the protagonist's development. Conversely, a character can be present for dozens of hours and still feel flat if they don't grow, change, or challenge the player in any meaningful way. The distinction isn't between main characters and side characters, it's between characters who are woven into the narrative fabric and those who simply orbit it. I'm still not sure if I made the right choice at the end of Expedition 33. I doomed an entire world to extinction that, yes, may have been a painting, but that felt real to me nonetheless. The Descendres are, technically speaking, no more real than the painted world they created. It's pretty strongly implied that the ending where you kick Alicia out of the painting is considered to be the good ending, given the respective tones of each ending, but even the good ending left a pit in my stomach. As I watched Lune, Ciel, Monoko, Eskia, and Verso disappear into nothingness, I felt a very real hollowness. They were as real to me as the Descendres, if not more so. And maybe that's the main takeaway here. These characters all felt real to me despite the obvious fact that they are not. The end of the game had a very real and profound impact on me, as all my favorite games tend to. I still miss these characters, and yet it feels wrong to go back and do post-game stuff with the same party I just doomed to oblivion. It wouldn't feel right. I can't just go back and pretend like nothing happened because something did happen, something that felt real to me. So, to return to the question I posed at the beginning of this video, how do we decide which NPCs are real to us? I'm not entirely sure we choose at all. NPCs become real to us through the proximity they have to us, the time we spend with them, and the empathy we feel for them. We assign reality to characters not based on tangibility, but based on what hurts to lose. Thus, maybe a better question to ask is this: have we not brought these characters to life in some small way by remembering them and mourning their loss? If we feel real emotions for fictional characters, does that not make them real too, in a sense? I certainly think so.